from the cloudy Copenhagen, and welcome to the last session of the training on energy efficiency, eTraining to Mozambique, hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Begonia, and I'm working as a research assistant at the Copenhagen Center, and I will be the moderator for today's training session. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our training. This session is going to be about 90 minutes long, including time for Q&A at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days on the Copenhagen Center's knowledge management system. And we have many other material and information there. Have a look. I will give you more information in a few minutes. Before we start discussing about today's training, I would like to inform our attendees that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. You have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time, you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presented here. A few things about the Copenhagen Center. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. Now, I would like to briefly introduce the speaker of today's training session. Jorge Hinojosa has been involved in diverse climate change mitigation and adaptation projects in Latin America. At UNEP DTU, he is working in climate finance and policy projects responding to the Paris Agreement, involving international research and case studies. He holds a Master in Environmental Studies and Sustainable from Lund University. Xianli is our other panelist, and she's working as a senior economist, and her work at UNEP DTU focuses on designing and enabling policies and programs for energy efficiency improvement and climate change mitigation. She holds a PhD in economics. Our last panelist of today's training session is Fernando Farias. He's a chemical engineer with more than 20 years of work experience on climate change policy and atmospheric pollution. Among other things, he is a member of the UNFCCC roster of experts and currently reviews greenhouse gases national inventories submitted to the convention, mainly in energy sector, as well as national communication and biennial reports. Finally, I would like to inform you can send us your questions during the presentations, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please don't forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And now I would like to give the floor to our first panelist, Jorge Hinojosa. Jorge, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning. All right, so I'm gonna talk to you all right now about business models, specifically and financing schemes. Later on, my colleague Xianli is gonna be diving more into the financial mechanisms. I'm gonna be using more of the business models, energy efficiency. The contents right now are going to start with energy efficiency bundling business models, and we're going to explain how bundling and aggregation is going to work at a practical level. So we're going to go through business models such as ESCO, Super ESCO, pay-as-you-save, and we're going to compare and going to end up with innovative financing schemes and new revenue models that are happening in municipalities and buildings, and some case studies. So to start, I want to show the main objectives that we have for energy efficiency project bundling, and that means if we are going to have an aggregation of projects, we're going to bundle projects. We need to have a specific outcome, right? This happens when a lot of actors don't really have access to financing, or they have many barriers. So the point is, we're gonna bundle EE projects to lower market barriers, to achieve more project bankability, and to save, to have more cost-saving benefits. Why is this happening? If if I am a specific municipality with limited resources and I want to access finance, equity, or debt, any kind of finance just for a project in buildings where I need to improve energy efficiency, lighting, heating, water, different measures. So if I want that, I might get together with more actors and actually bundle so I can lower market barriers and achieve bankability in a better way. To explain this is that several actors can actually seek financing together. In this sense, we can unlock larger investments. It's happening in many municipalities in Latin America where I've been working. Many of the buildings in cities are actually not able to access long-term financing schemes because they don't have access to that credit or because the infrastructure is going to be difficult to be paid for. And when we use this bundling and economies of scale, then we can reduce the costs of the projects and there's a possibility for it to happen, right? So the point is to bundle into a single investment portfolio. And so we have all the actors together bundled in a project, having the access to potential lenders and financing, right? And when we have an investment portfolio with more actors, then this is going to mean the risk is going to diminish for the energy efficiency activities to happen. So I'm going to start with the first business model on bundling. I know that in the previous models, ESCOs have been defined by my colleagues. But the point here is if we have project bundling and we look for a business model for, let's say, 5 buildings together to look for improvements and save energy and have lower costs, we can go to ESCOs actually, because the point of ESCOs is to provide the upgrade and energy savings, right? And we want to guarantee energy efficiency. We want to guarantee energy efficiency under a performance-based contract. And ESCOs, as they have been defined before, they're going to take care of projects financing in operational settings. So they're going to guarantee savings at a lower cost. As a business model, we want to use ESCOs because they're going to allow public building and facilities owners to opt for larger capital investment upgrades. And we know that many times one of the limitations for energy efficiency activities in a building and a group of buildings is that we're going to have a lot of market risks and financial barriers. When we have energy performance-based contracts and projects together that are outsourced actually, and ESCOs take care of that, they can monitor and verify energy savings. They can let us know how the performance is going and assure that we are actually achieving energy efficiency and savings, because the whole point of ESCOs is to achieve the savings, right? So one of the ways of going through ESCOs is energy performance contracting. It's been described before, but we're just going to say that as a model, it allows ESCOs to become service providers and contractors. So if we're going to have the bundling projects, the offer to the building owners and sponsors is going to be guaranteeing performance energy savings through a contract with the ESCO. So let's think about the ESCO as the company, the energy service company that guarantees the energy savings. And of course, the project is expected to guarantee these savings, and which will help actually to repay the investment costs, right? Because we are having the savings through the energy efficiency improvements, right? This is going to be a new technology that, of course, is going to help this happen. Yeah, so we're going to describe 2 ways EPC models in ESCOs are being used. in practical cases. The first one is the shared savings EPC model, and the second one we're going to go to is the guaranteed savings model. First one is going to be the ESCO taking care of the financing instruments with institutions, the banks, and actually the ESCO finances the client. So with this savings, the savings are going to be used by the client to pay the ESCO, and finally the ESCO can pay the loan to the bank, right? So when you achieve the energy savings, the ESCO is going to receive the performance-based income of the project. In a picture, the ESCO is actually, dealing with a loan and institution repaying, and between the ESCO and the client on the right side, we just have the ESCO implementing the project, and that payment from the client to the ESCO based on the obtained savings. So those are the conditions for the shared savings model, right? For the next model of the ESCO, the guaranteed savings model, the point is to guarantee savings on the user's energy bill. In this case, the ESCO is going to actually assume technical risks, but the client is going to obtain the financing from equity or debt to pay for the fees to the ESCO and the financial institution. In the picture, this means that we have the client on the left side dealing with the financing and loan and repayment, and we have the ESCO on the right side actually just implementing, providing savings guarantee, and not doing like we had on the shared savings model, right? It's a bit different. This is the basic understanding of business models, because we're going to go to more innovative later on, the ones we are using right now as well. The super ESCO business model, when we have an ESCO, the super ESCO is an entity that's going to be used to, specifically for the public sector, it's been used in municipalities to work as a huge ESCO, right? This means that we want to have a possibility of unlocking large project financing via project aggregation and creating this entity that is a super ESCO that allows smaller ESCOs also to operate. For example, a super ESCO is created in a municipality, and this super ESCO is going to train, help, and finance smaller companies, smaller ESCOs that can work together in a program, in a pilot program, and then implementing schemes, right? So, for example, this super ESCO business model actually can have leasing schemes with the public sector, and leasing meaning it can be leasing equipment and technology and many things, finance to the smaller entities, right? So it's a way of doing project aggregation when you have a smaller ESCO and you cannot really access or not have the help from these entities, and it's needed, right? So another model of financing that is very useful for energy efficiency in practice, especially in cases where consumers cannot really access credit or financing schemes or the models that we described before, is the pay as you save model. And this one is actually allowing the clients to give upfront payments. No, sorry, it's actually allowing clients access cost-effective upgrades, just paying for a tariff, right? So they pay for a tariff through the electricity bills, and they can actually access the technology without having to apply for a credit. I mean, this modality is going to remove debt and cost barriers, because only through paying monthly fees and having energy savings, then consumers are going to be available to go through the financing model, right? This means that low-income consumers and remote access residential areas can access to these projects without having credit worthiness or being part of a bank or something like that. It just depends on the tariff and electricity bills, right? And the model works like this. We have the utility company and the capital provider actually providing finance to the utility company, which provides the investment upgrades in energy efficiency technologies to solution providers. And then you have the meter side. So you can have specifically an understanding of what was your saving in energy per month. And based on this, this is very similar to the ethical, of course, we can know how much you saved and you can pay for this technology month by month, right? Right. So as we only have half an hour, I'm gonna go through the main barriers in municipalities of these energy efficiency bottling business models. And the main market barriers is that for energy efficiency technologies, there are many high transaction costs, and the market organization and price distortion can be a barrier. Energy prices are below cost of supply, uncertain regulatory frameworks. This means that in many places, like in Latin America, in the cases I used to work for, there's no organization for this instrument still. There's no way to know how these business models are going to be operating, or if there's any help from the government, or how the market is actually growing, because it's very at the initial stage. And the transaction costs of a project that is 20 years water energy efficiency in buildings is a main barrier, right? So that's why we find this. Financial barriers, these ones are the most important for many municipalities, and limited borrowing capacity, credit worthiness. This is where the PACE model we just described is useful. High upfront costs of investment, and a perception of high risk and high transaction costs. So you talk to someone in the municipality and they tell you, oh, but this is an investment that is very large and it's going to be high in risk. And how do I bear this? How can I have a lower risk with all this technology that's going to come here for 15, 20 years and improve district heating or something like this, right? And technical, of course, many barriers are depending on municipal capacities and municipalities that have just lower terms of, let's say that elections happen every 3 years and then people come and go, and it's not very easy to maintain the capacities, right? Okay, so next. So per business model that we described, we have main barriers, of course, as well. And for example, the traditional ESCO model, when you want to apply this, some remote municipalities or cities that are not really connected to larger areas are going to have limited financing access to banks and normal processes of finance. And for the ESCO model, this is going to be a limitation. This super ESCO model depends on government availability, for instance, and we need a larger group of projects. So if this is not the case, if it's just like a small aggregate, it might not be a super ESCO model, right? And for the pay, as you say, there's a lot of lack access to information and limited familiarity with this case, with this business model. Sometimes it just does not exist in some places, where it's not like the policies and the market are not allowing it to grow still, because it's not on the local conditions. And we have many opportunities, as we describe in the module, for bundling business models. And one of the opportunities is when we innovate through our aggregated investments, and we allow stronger cooperation schemes, then we can have higher economic benefits for the bundle, because we have heating, cooling, lighting, and other energy efficiency upgrades in buildings, in this case, for example. And if we don't have this bundle together, then it's not possible sometimes. And for example, municipal financial guarantees can leverage from multilateral financial institutions. So a municipal bank can have financing from another larger international bank with lower interest rates, and then this can incentivize EPC contracts as bundled projects. This is going to simplify the cost effectiveness for many building owners, right? And for example, we're going to describe a case in Brazil later on, but when it comes to public lighting, there are many opportunities for cities using LED technologies, saving as much as 70% of the energy through using these bundling modules, right? Yeah, this is the case of Brazil. So we describe how there were many, as we said on the last slides before, there were many capacities that were not there. And the solution was to aggregate municipalities as a consortium that managed the financing process via an SPV. This means a fund, right, that was used to manage this. Using the ESCO model, municipalities upgraded lighting and made the repayments. This was the consortium, right, that was managing this. So in that case, it was possible to access the capital at a more competitive rate, because we have the economies of scale we talked about, and the operation and maintenance was also took care of the ESCO business model that we described. So then this happened in 13 Brazilian cities using the model, and they could actually have leases, so leases for the lighting technology, so they don't really need to own the equipment, right? They can have a lease for 10, 20 years of the lamps they're going to use, lighting they're going to use, and this makes it less expensive too. So yeah, I'm going to go through the next phase here. So I'm finalizing with the business models that are being used right now on public buildings, retrofitting, deep renovation. The point is because we have many cases where we think about just renovation and many innovating options, not to be investing in expensive projects and large scale financing that is not possible sometimes. So an example is the one-stop shop business model, where clusters, public-private partnerships, and innovative technologies are being used to solve energy efficiency issues. Meaning this is integrating the the building owner, and in multifamily buildings, social housing, when we want to have an intervention for renovation. So instead of having a solution just coming from finance or from the bank, we can actually use more technologies in a bundled way, right? So if we have a renovation, we can use crowdfunding or home-based financing in the same building, let's say, just to have more participatory investment on the renovations. So we have a case, for example, in Spain, in Laguna del Duero, where the renovation on energy efficiency and district heating was actually linked to a loan with Triodos Bank, because this was a private company wanted to help the owners community. This is social housing, right? And the only way to access a financing scheme was through actually having the owners approving a community by themselves. So the building owners aggregate and bundle, right? And they pay monthly fees to pay for this loan. I mean, this loan actually was for a district heating in the social housing buildings, but it was possible because we have this initiative, right? So basically, energy efficiency saving and emissions were achieved because the financing was sustainable. That was the point of doing it. And this is an example of a bundling that can happen in a place where it's not that easy to access normal financing. This was like lowered rates. And of course, we have the incentives of the European Union in this case. It could be an incentive, a donation, a grant, or many types of incentives that are going to be described later, because right now my colleague Xianli is going to talk to you next about financing schemes and mechanisms. So I'm going to finalize here.
Thanks a lot, Jorge. That's a very good background presentation. So lays a basis for the next my presentation regarding the financing. I think a lot actually Jorge is from how to say the market, the financing, the business model, the service providers point of view. What are the options there? And here it's more like from the project owner. If you develop a project, how do you consider different options and get your project financed? Following up with the previous presentation, a lot we are talking is actually based on the material in this source book we have developed recently from the Copenhagen Center on project bundling in municipalities. So some part we are talking about municipal energy efficiency project bundles. I know many of you are not really working in municipalities, but some parts are common as a utility company, public utility company. You may face some of the issues may be also relevant to you. First, there are some preconditions. If you think about making this commercially, the energy efficiency project, so one is like the payment. If the government authority or local government, they do not need to pay the energy bills. In some countries, that's the case. Then it's difficult to say this is kind of investment through energy bill saving. Another thing very important for any energy efficiency project to be financially or economically viable is the energy prices. If the energy prices is heavily subsidized, then it's difficult to make the project profitable, energy efficiency investment profitable. Also, the stability of energy prices. Sometimes this can change a lot. That's also affect the project's returns, because often a project it need several 1 year, 3 years, 5 years to recover its investment. So that kind of energy price sometimes fluctuations also affects the project financial viability. And also, energy efficiency investment is based on the often like you have to make the upfront investment, then recover the cost or make the savings over the certain period of time through energy saving, so that to make the public sector project viable, that needs to be some in the government budget part, some flexibility. If the local government authority only allow to the energy use is a separate budget line and the investment a separate budget line. There's no coordination. That's also sometimes make it difficult to finance the energy project. And financing, there are many options. The different some in mature market, there are often more options. Like you can sometimes issue bonds or crowd financing, go to commercial credit lines, commercial banks, financial institutions to get the loans or the financing options that often require more mature financing market. Another part is public financing. That means using government budget grants to finance the project. So you can see many different options: grants, budget financing, with co-financing. That part you do not need so much financing market. On the other side, if you need the project financing with the escrows or vendor financing, or commercial loans, then you need more developed financial market, or sometimes you need some risk guarantees, insurance in the process involvement, so that when such services are available, that makes it easier to get commercial financing sources, commercial funding for energy efficiency projects. Often that influence the different availability of financing options is also the credit worthiness. We have 2 years ago we talked in New York with quite a few big team of different international actors, financiers about this financing. It's often many cases energy efficiency projects, they get loans not because the project itself, more because the project owner's own financial strength and credit worthiness. And also the predictability of revenues and budget transfers and local legal and regulatory framework. In some cases, public authorities, local authorities, whether they are allowed to, how much they can allow to borrowing. There are many countries, there are such regulations. And also the commercial financial environment, where whether the commercial banks, financial institutions, they have the expertise to evaluate such projects, approve such loans, and also the project bundles. Some project bundles, they are mature technology, not so much risk, then it's easier for them to get financing. Also the implementation capacity. Energy efficient projects, their returns dependent on the project properly operated and implemented and get the energy saving. So that implementation capacity is also important capacity factor. And also the first option is, of course, public authority or municipalities. You will look at where their own funding, whether they have some savings or budget funding or grants from national or regional governments. And sometimes they can also access international development agencies, give some funding. And the cities can choose, sometimes they have a general contractor to do this, carry out the procurement, installation, and construction, or they can have different companies to do different parts of the activity and do the energy auditing, designing of the project, procurement, installation. So there are many different options for the implementation. Off-balance funding solutions. That is often that the municipality does not need to do, or the project owner, they do not need to use their own funding. So that with off balance sheet, that means they do not need to have a local affect their own balance sheet or use external like ESCOs to funding the project and get the projects implemented. Another way, is this off-bill financing or on-bill financing or ESCOs. This ESCOs is really when they are available because they combine the technical expertise, so they can come out and assess how much energy saving is possible, how much investment is needed, what's the risk level, and often when they have the shared saving model, they also provide the financing. So in such case, that's one great option when municipalities do not have their own funding. And on-bill financing, as Jorge already explained, that means the municipality or the public company, they can utility, they continue pay the bill as they used to, and over a certain period of time, the financiers they get recover the investment, also get certain profit, so they can transfer the equipment, the devices to the user, to the facility owner. In this way, they do not affect the owner, do not have to pay or have the extra cost, major cost increase in their bills. And the vendor's credit, this is often neglected or not so much overlooked option. Actually, in many cases, you do public procurement. Often that the suppliers, they can offer some installment payment option. That's kind of commercial credit. If you say we can pay this over 3 years, negotiate that. That can be a great way to save or reduce the upfront requirement for the payment. And also, the previous presentation also mentioned this leasing option. Often, like you hear the equipment provider or some leasing company who are willing to lease the equipment for a certain period. So that also reduce the municipality or public authorities, public agencies in needs for upfront investment in energy efficiency project. And also this commercial credit and development credit. Development credit, sometimes it can be national or it can be international to get such low interest loans. Often they are often low, very low interest. And the commercial credit, that's often from banks. Increasingly in many countries, commercial banks are also offering commercial credit lines on energy efficiency projects so that they have special teams or special allocation certain amount of funding each year for the loans to such type of energy efficiency projects. Often that means they also have the capacity to assess the project loan applications and approve it. Often we talk about, when you talk about to financial institutions, often you will hear that they say it's not lack of funding, it's the lack of bankable projects. So what does bankable really mean? It means like the project is robust enough, that they have a robust revenue flow, and from the risk perspective, it's attractive to finance it. So although that the financing often we sort it as a talk it as a large step. When you have the project proposal ready, you go to a bank for getting go talk to various financiers to finance it. But often you need to think this in the very beginning, how to make this project. Control the risks and increase the returns, make it robust so that make it energy attractive to finance it. So in the process, I need to consider the technical economic assessment when you design the project, and in terms of what's the payback period, what's the different risks, and how the incentives, how to motivate different actors to participate. So you have a very reliable or stable project arrangement, so that it's easy also get financial institutions to reduce the risk, get the project financed. Often when you think about different financing options, that's the risk and the return trade-off. Normally, when you give a project of high risk, then the financiers or investors would require higher returns. Higher risk often means higher return to be balanced at the possibility of losses. So when you have that's also a very important fact to consider when you have a different where to get the funding, and depending on the risk level, and the different financial organizations often have different perception or acceptability of risks and the project returns. The risk management, there are many ways to management or control the risk level of project through proper project scoping and design and the partnership. So in the process, and also contract arrangement, you can in a way to reduce the risk. And also sometimes financial organizations, especially loans, they may need to some collateral or guarantees. Also sometimes they are also available in some countries. That's also available for insurance. So in case the project fails, the financiers, they can in a way recover their part, at least part of their investment. Also, like the public-private partnership, also mentioned in the previous presentation, public sector often they do not have enough funding, so get the private sector involvement is an important way to leverage the project finance, so get more investment in the process, and also like especially super escorts and revolving fund, and also education and capacity building. So it's really a super ESCO is a very interesting way. It's recently in recent years, quite a few countries are trying that. That like India, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Armenia, US, Belgium, many countries they are trying that. One advantage with super ESCO is it combines financial and technical capacity in one organization. Super ESCO, that means that they are large, they have strong technical capacity, that and in some cases they are easier to get financing, like the Indian one. The ESL, they are quite successful in that way. They get hundreds of millions of dollars of low interest loans from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, so that they can go out to do large scale public procurement. They are very successful that in that way they really managed to transform the Indian lighting market. So because they are so successful, so quickly the country's lighting from incandescent to CFL and LED, that transition because of the large scale procurement. It changed the market not only for the public sector and also for the households. So that's why Super ESCO is so quite attractive in countries, because small ESCOs, due to their financing capacity and technical expertise, so sometimes it's struggle to get custom clients and get contracts that or get financing. But the super ESCO sometimes can quickly pull the resource together and get promote, especially the public sector, as energy efficiency implementation. And the revolving fund. Another way for the public sector is setting up a revolving fund. So like the public institutions, government agencies, when they have some opportunities, they can go and ask for funding to get the project financed, implemented. Then through the savings, the revolving fund recover their funding. So in that way, they can continuously provide a source of reliable funding for continuous implementation of such projects. And also in the Another important factor is education and capacity building. For such project to be financed, there need to be strong education capacity building to improve the project development capacity, how to make the project properly designed, and the implementation so that reduce the risks to make it attractive, also including the energy audit, data collection, project designing, out of the daily project management. So make the project proper repair and maintenance, energy managers, energy auditors to make the project easier to implement through the process. For energy audit, often there are three steps. One is preliminary energy audit. It's a quick assessment. What are the opportunities? What are the saving opportunities? And what to work on for the energy efficiency action, the technologies. And another is a detailed audit. It's a walkthrough to look at different equipment, try to check, make a detailed plan. Finally, it's the investment grade detailed audit. That is when the need to look at all the different possibility of risks and what should and the management to make sure the investment is reduce the risk through the investment for the investment. There are many, so that there are in conclusion, there are many different options for financing of public energy efficiency projects. Like one is public institutions' own budget fund, and also the public finance from the national or regional government, and also international finance organizations sometimes, like the World Bank, GIZ, they also provide some financing. Also, dedicated energy efficiency funds that can be domestic or international. And in the end, there's also commercial financing from banks, private investors. Sometimes it's also the issue of bonds. So when you consider the different factors you need to consider, as I mentioned before, the project owner's credit worthiness, whether they are reliable or is the lenders, project investors are think these are low risks, and the predictability of the project revenues, whether this project has a very reliable or predictable revenue flow, and the legal and regulatory frameworks, and finally also the implementation capacity is also very important. So in the US, they have this marsh market. It's for the municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals. So they are mainly rely on self-funding, and also they have financial institutions to provide loans and escrows for designing the projects, installing the equipment. So in such a way, they really able to manage large scale energy retrofitting of the public institutions. So these are different measures. You can see different projects. Some projects they are building retrofit, often a little long payback period. That also depends on deep renovation. If you not only change the windows, doors, some also the roofs, the insulation, the walls, that may make it a long payback period. And some others like lighting that can be very short payback period. And the utilities, if you want to renovate your grid, that may need also a little long payback period. And also accordingly, based on the technical complexity, investment needs, payback period. So you have to consider what's the different options to financing such projects. Finally, that's a decision tree. Often energy efficiency projects, they need more than one kind of financing. Needed to consider often commercial banks, they won't financing 100% of your project. So they will need to consider, okay, Also, they are even if they are willing to, often they require high interest rate. You need to consider what are the options you have to finance your project. So this is a decision-making tree, more to ask what are options I have, how much, so to what extent I can finance my project. In the end, the financing of a project is often a combination of different options. So that needed to consider in the whole process. What's the best option? What are the options available? What's the best one most suitable for this project? So this is a decision-making tree to consider the process. Also, in the Copenhagen Center, we develop a street lighting financing tool. Also have a similar structure, like a more complicated to consider all the different options. Project developer have to get their project financed. Thank you. That's all from me for this presentation.
Bom dia. My name is Fernando Farias. I am from Chile, and I also work at UNEP DTU, and I'm in charge of presenting you the module 5, which is called Measurement, Reporting, and Verification, which stands for MRV systems. When we're talking of MRV, we are talking of 3 components that are worked together as a single system. The first component is a measurement component that refers to the collection of information to follow the progress of the implementation and impacts related to an energy saving action project. That also has an impact on mitigating GHG emissions, or has also a climate impact. Then we have a second component, the report component, that provides the information that has been measured, but needs to be properly reported in a defined and transparent manner to the corresponding receiving people or authorities. And finally, we have a verification component, means an evaluation of the information that is presented in terms of how complete is, how coherent, and how reliable this is. And this verification is performed by a third party. Now, how can we use an MRV system? We can use it to ensure that the results of the implementation of a mitigation action or an energy efficient action is occurring, that the impacts are properly accounted, quantified, and reported. An MRV system can be part of a more integrated monitoring system in the short, medium, and long term. And it can also provide feedback on how is the progress being made for decision makers in regards to particular projects. And it can also therefore provide the opportunity to improve a project if the project is not working very well. Before the project finishes, with an MRV system, we can take measures in order to improve the current operation of the project. Now, if we speak in terms of applicability of an MRV system to energy efficiency project, in this regard, we will count on MRV as a tool that monitors in a specialized and exact way the impact generated by the project and how they are progressing. This information can be crucial to gain the interest of stakeholders to attract financial support and contribute to the subsequent implementation of this project, as it was presented by my colleagues previously, Jorge and Xianli. the decision making in order to how the projects are progressing is very important. I will say that if we have a tool that is accepted by everyone, is more simple and is a more simple way in order to agree on what the project is lacking or how the project is progressing. Now let's see in more detail each of the elements of such an MRV system, and we will start with the measurement component. Basically, what we want to do is an evaluation of indicators that allow us to identify the impacts or the savings that we are doing as a result of the implementation of the project, mainly in terms of, in our case, the lower energy consumption, the reduction in the generation of GHG emissions, economic costs, and other additional co-benefits. If we count with numerical data, this set of quantitatively determined information can provide us a solid numerical basis to characterize the multiple benefits associated with this type of energy project. At the end of the day, what we need is to implement a plan for the measurement should state clearly what should we want to measure, who will do the measure, and how the measurements will be taken. We are talking of different metrics. It can be a financial metric, it can be a process metric, it can be a technical metric. I will give you some practical examples on this concept now. Because in here you can see that well, in the case of the financial metrics, probably it was much thoroughly presented by my three previous presenters here in the session when they talk you about the financial metrics. But in the case of other MRV elements, we are also talking of process metrics, and here you can see a number of examples, as well as quantitative technical metrics that are the data or the measurements we need in order to assess properly how the project is evolving in time. Now, how we can perform the calculations, and I will especially focus on the case of GHG emissions. One option, but not the only one, is to use as a source, or as a methodological source, what is called the Clean Development Mechanism Methodology Notebook, which is a tool by United Nations that includes more than 100 typologies of projects that have been submitted to obtain what is called carbon emission reductions, or CERs, under the CDM mechanism. Even if the energy efficiency project is not expected to be included into the CDM mechanism and try to gain some carbon emission reductions, still the proposed methodologies that are included to assess can serve as the technical basis for estimating the GHG emission reductions related with this variety of projects. So we have an initial methodology established and with that methodology, we can identify properly what are the reductions of GHG emissions associated with implementation of the project. Here, I'm presenting you a number of methodologies out of these more than 100 that I mentioned before that are useful for different types of energy efficiency projects in municipality at municipality level. In this slide, and the following one, I'll introduce you to some parameters needed for performing calculations such as a consumption or emissions mitigation. Basically, what we want to do is to put together a characterization of a project, what are the impact it has on energy terms, with some parameters, some reference parameters and some measurements parameters. This includes projects in the area of water distribution, in the area of efficient lighting, in the area of energy efficiency at a project building level. And what we are talking here is how we can reduce consumption or how to reduce the use of fossil fuels if our energy matrix is based on carbon or has an important level of CO2 emissions associated. If now we can move to the second component of the MRV system, we are talking of the preparation of reports. And what we want is to disseminate and reveal in a standardized and periodic way how the project is, what is the performance of the project on a regular basis to different interested parties. And if the project performance is not as expected, then the information reported can serve to take corrective action. Depending on who receives the report, different methods may be available to compile and display the information presented. It could be, for instance, that someone is more interested in the economic performance of the project than in the GHG emissions. If this is the case, then it is possible to consider including more economic indicators in the report, or carry out a more detailed analysis of the financial issues related to the project. What are the contents we are minimally expecting in a report of this of an MRV system? We are talking of probably 3 points to address. First of all, a description of the organization of information presented in the report, including sources and institutional organization used to gain this data, the legal framework that allows to collect this information and to process it. Secondly, as a part of the report, a description of the technical approach used to obtain the information and related calculation. In here, the example I gave you about how can you use, for instance, the CDM methodologies in terms of calculation of GHG emissions. And finally, a description of how the quality of the information used in the report was verified. Finally, in the MRV system, we are into the verification component. The verification is generally carried out at the national level and consists of external reviews of the information obtained through the implementation of the mitigation measure. In general, an authority, a public institution, is in charge of the global verification process, but sometimes for agility reasons or for lack of staff, may refer to a company specialized in verification processes, such as energy auditors with knowledge of MRV system, for example. So verification might also serve as a technical feedback between national and local officials. Basically, what we are expecting is that these third parties that are in charge of the verification are not involved in generating the data, so it can be some sort of independent assessors of the elements that are to be verified. Now we have all the elements. We need to organize the information as a part of the MRV system, which is the part of the finally the package of the MRV system. And what we need to have now is considered how important is not only thinking on the numbers, but also in how to produce this information on a regular basis. It is not only important that we have it at one time, but we should aim to have this assessment on a regular basis so we can compare how our project at different stages is progressing, on how the problems are solved or amended, at least in terms of the proper implementation of the project. As an example, as a final example of how can we organize the information in the MRV system, here is for each of these components that I mentioned to you before, the measurement, the reporting, and the verification, the basic questions. What was done as a part of the project? Who was involved as a part of the project? How the information of, in this case, of measurement was done, when the measurements were done, and if there are some general observation associated to that. The same goes to the report and to the verification. What can be done as a part of the report or the verification process? Who is in charge of doing this part of reporting, of verification? How, with which tools are the report and verification done? How regularly? In this case, it can be on an annual basis or similar. And final observations. Finally, and to allow some time for questions, I will just bring 3 conclusions. If we decide to use an MRV system in the project, we will enhance the robustness and highlight the related savings in terms of avoided energy consumption and GHG emission mitigation. So it can be a good manner in order to be civilized, make visible the information associated to the project in terms not only of energy, but also in terms of climate and climate mitigation. It will also serve to identify how a project is progressing, and if there are some problems, take the time, the appropriate time to apply a corrective action as a part of a continuous improvement process. And finally, projects operating with MRV support are expected to be evaluated on a regular basis. So this can serve as an improvement in time with the adequate monitoring. And this is what I wanted to present you as an introduction to MRV, so you can be aware of these systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fernando, Jorge, and Xianli for the very interesting presentations. Now I would like to introduce the Q&A session, and we have received very good questions from the audience. The first question is for you, Jorge, and it's as follows. What happens if the ESCO under the EPC scheme doesn't achieve expected savings?
This is Jorge here. So, if it doesn't achieve expected savings, then the whole business model is not going to work, because it is just designed for energy savings to cover the financing and the cost, as we saw the guaranteed savings models in the EPC contracting and all this. It depends on our performance per month on the electricity bill if we're going to be able to cover the costs. And so this is a very good question, but yeah, it is designed for example, the technology that we apply, the new LED technology must be more modern and more cost saving. If not, yeah, there's no way to work with that. Yeah. Next.
Yeah, thank you, Jorge, for the response. The next two questions we have received are for Xianli. So Xianli, the first question. It looks like the legal and regulatory framework is the main factor for financing models. Can you advise the starting point to establish ESCOs or other business models?
Yes, definitely. That's a correct point. The legal and the regulatory framework is really affecting factor for how can you finance an energy efficiency project. The starting point to establish ESCOs. We see in many countries, often the ESCO is starting with the public sector, and also another, like the government started to take the lead to give a stable flow of projects like the schools, hospitals, and to start renovate that retro energy efficiency project. So they can be a lot of public facilities. It can be a steady this project pipeline, so that when you establish the ESCO, when the public or the business are not really aware of how to do this or whether this is how this work in practice, often it's started with public sector. Another good starting point, even in many countries where there's not the very advanced financial market, is starting with utilities actually. Is the pay as you save model. Like the utility company, because they have long-term this kind of customer relations. We know their customers, how much they use energy, and they know they have to pay the energy bill. So in that way, when they can roll out, procure many energy efficient like lighting or refrigerator or washing machine and give it out to consumers to change those equipment, and so that they can ask the consumers or the clients to pay back in the as part of their energy bill. So that is a good starting point. Of course, also in other kind of like the super ESCOs, starting with the public procurement. So in the law, in the regulatory framework, that's a lot need to do. Also, you can see related to the first question, when the ESCO, the project, the project does not deliver the expected savings. Sometimes, of course, they over deliver, they achieve more than expected savings. Sometimes they do not do as much as they are expected. So that's the government also needs to have the regulation how to you decide or calculate the saving, energy saving. So if there's if this does not achieve enough, it's the project, the client's fault. They do not operate the equipment as expected, or it's really what's the reason is that not expect? Is the ESCO overestimate? So it's really a lot of regulations according guidelines, technical guidelines, standards that need to be in place for a proper ESCO to work. But as I said, the starting point could be the public sector, the utility company. Those could be good starting point.
Yeah, thank you, Xianli, for the response. Another question we also have received for you. To get private sector involved in energy efficiency business models, they also need to be educated. What is the easiest way to get them capacitated and embarking on energy efficiency financing mechanisms?
And as I said, this energy efficiency, when you do this, often you need people to properly assess what's the energy current level, the energy use, and what are the technical options to change that, and the different available options. So one way to start this education is like the energy auditors who can, with the not only the technical capacity but also the market. They know the different prices of equipment, so they can go out do the energy auditing and first is identify the opportunities. Another important, that's the starting point for any energy efficiency project to start some energy auditing, identify the opportunities with the actual reliable data. And another thing is energy managers. Those are two types of expertise you will need. The energy managers who can do the day-to-day to collect the data, to operate the equipment properly. That's often the client side. Energy auditing is the auditor's set, the ethical set energy model for this business model to work. You also like even in banks, you need someone with the proper capacity to be able to evaluate. That's the way to risk control, design such project. So the easiest way to is get such a kind of capacity building to train the people properly so they can identify the opportunity, assess them, and know how to do it in practice. Often, like in many countries, there's also the accredit. For example, recent work in Kenya, they have energy auditors, like the accreditation system. The national authorities, they give the training, they give the if they pass the exams, do some proper real projects, test projects, so they get the certificate. They can go out to help us. So such a accreditation or certification system will be important training for this to start to work with the right technical expertise. The experts to go out to do the project identification and can managing them from day-to-day operation.
Thank you, Xianli, for the very detailed responses. And now the last questions we have received, they are for Fernando. So Fernando, the first question for you. What is the relationship between international performance measurement and verification protocol and cost effectiveness testing?
Thank you, Begonia. We have a number of international opportunities in order to apply either for an MRV system on its own or parts of the MRV system, for instance, the verification part. As I presented in the previously, the verification part can be done by external partners, and this can be done at different levels. So it can be done with also applying different methodologies or relying more, for instance, in ISO tools or in ISO data. So what I will say is that in terms of cost effectiveness is that what we need is some tools that can be useful for the project, but not that can entail a high cost. I mean, we are not expecting that if the project is a small project, then we will use a very detailed tool for verification. Rather, what we want is to be sure that the data has a minimum standard. That will be for Q4. Now, should I move to the Q5?
Yes, that question is also addressed to you.
Okay, thank you. The question is how we relate the MRV or these tools with other strategies such as risk management. Well, basically, what we have especially at the industrial level or the private sector level, a variety of different tools. And sometimes what happens is the tools perform similar, have similar objectives, but we call them in a different way. Or what happens sometimes is that we are using different methodological frameworks, initial methodological frameworks, and then we have a tool that is apparently different from the others. But I agree with the questions in terms that we have to think an MRV system in terms of what other tools are also available are in implementation. For instance, if there are some tools that are collecting data, we don't want to start collecting again data, because this data already is under a process of collection and sometimes under a QA/QC process, so we are sure that the data is of good quality. In these terms, what my advice will be, if we want to implement a MRV system as a part of a climate strategy, then we need to see what's the environment in terms of other strategies that or tools that are available at the same time for assessing the project.
Thank you so much, Fernando, and also thank you to the other panelists for the very detailed responses to the questions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the end of these training sessions. I would like to say thank you to the panelists for the informative and interesting presentations, and to the audience for the active participation. We hope that the presentations will be beneficial for all stakeholders involved in energy efficiency. Thank you so much for your attention, and wish you a good day or night from Copenhagen.